Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Pastor Siri, and today on this episode we're going to be looking at what really was the way of Jesus and the message of Jesus. Stick around. We're going to take a look at what Jesus actually taught by looking at the main themes in all four of the Gospels, very briefly, and what he did himself. Because I believe that Jesus wanted us to walk in his dust, meaning that he was showing us a particular way of living that was ultimately going to be freeing and healing for us. It never made sense to me that Jesus would spend 3 years of ministry teaching and leading his disciples if the only important thing was him dying on the cross and rising 3 days later, and all we had to do to be a Christian was to come to church, sing about how great Jesus was because he died for us and now we get to go to heaven. It doesn't make sense to me. So if we actually look at what Jesus taught and said, we get a very different message. His focus was very different. First of all, he begins right away by being baptized by his cousin John. That's how he starts his ministry in all four Gospels. And it's an interesting choice, but there's so much symbolism in that. In the waters of baptism, there's a symbolism of literally going back to your mother's womb and being reborn as something more than what the world has allowed us to be so far. Remember that Jesus knew very clearly that he was going to be proclaiming a message that was contrary to what the rest of the world understood. One that was of deep connection to God and of freeing the self from the story of the world. And so first he initiates the beginning of his new call, his new ministry, his new personhood by being reborn in the womb waters of the Creator. And then right away he goes into the wilderness to have like a spiritual retreat and a very intense experience. We hear this word where Jesus goes to be tempted by Satan. And there's a lot of interesting things we trip up in there. The word satana in Aramaic actually means that which we don't want to look at. That which is sort of the shadowy parts of ourselves even. And it could be things out in the world, but it's not necessarily a singular entity who's coming to do bad things. It's not even bad. The shadows parts of ourselves are parts we don't want to be there. It's parts that we've refused to allow and refused to see, but they may not necessarily be bad. And even if they are, they're not going to go away until we deal with them and look with them. Shadows come to all of us from hurts and from pains, from limiting beliefs and blocks that we have been taught, that have been passed down through the family and through the culture. Everybody has them, and they get in the way of so much that we want to do. So often, without realizing it, we can self-sabotage our own efforts and get in our own way for love and for healing and for abundance, because somehow maybe we don't feel we deserve it. Because there's another thought in there that's nagging us saying, you can't think that way, you can't be that way, or you'll be bad. Well, Jesus wasn't going to be any good to anyone if he went out in the world and was trapped by his own internal thoughts and limiting beliefs. And so to begin, he leaves the water and he goes right into the wilderness. And there he goes for the purpose of meeting his shadows, of meeting anything that was going to derail his ministry. And that's what he did. And then as soon as he goes into the world, in each of the four Gospels, the first words that come out of his mouth are something a little different, but all super amazing and profound. In Matthew, when Jesus comes out, the first thing he says is he calls some disciples and says, "Come and follow me." Not come and worship me, not come and bow down and see how awesome I am. Come and do what I'm doing. Come and live with me, and something's going to happen. In Mark, the first thing Jesus says is, change your mind, because the realm of God, the reality of God is all around you, and it's inside you. You just need to see it. In Luke, Jesus goes to a synagogue and unrolls a scroll and reads this powerful passage about liberation and freeing the oppressed. It's this beautiful passage that's just fixing all the wrongs in this world. And then in John, Jesus just simply says, come and see. Come and see for yourself. Can you see how none of these things are forceful or controlling or manipulative? None of them are even really about worshiping and focusing on Him. They're just, I want to show you something. I want to show you another way to be. And that's exactly what He does. We see through His miracles, through His teachings, through His healings, through the way He just interacts with people, especially women and outcasts and children, that He's showing a completely different way to be in this world. His ministry was about this world. Our suffering is happening in this world. Being trapped is happening in this world. Violence is happening in this world. And so He's showing His disciples a way to live in this world that is freeing from that is different from that can create a community that lives differently from that, and that can expand out into the world. They're practicing together another way to be. And this is what it is, to be first connected with God, who is right there, right all around us and speaking in our heart, to be connected to that true self that God made us to be, not what everybody else says we should be, not what the ego that we created to protect us thinks we need to do to be a good kid, a lovable kid, a smart kid. No. What's really, really deep inside, we got to get through all the layers of dirt and pain, and we got to get down and find that beautiful soul and let it grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we're going to learn to connect with all of creation, everything around us, because everything's actually connected. We're not as separate as we think we are. The inside affects the outside affects the inside. And all of these layers interpenetrate each other. We've just been taught to see everything as separate. And because we can't see the waves, we can't see the frequencies, we can't see the energy, we assume it's not there. And then we're confused as to why we feel so confused and alone and stuck and bleh. So Jesus shows a way of living in this world that is fundamentally interconnected. And because of the interconnectedness, it is based off of love and compassion and service and grace and mercy. And over again, He demonstrates this non-judgmental forgiveness and love over and over again, because He's trying to get into His disciples and anyone He encounters that this is another way to live in the world. One that's not about worthiness and not about ladders, but one that's about harmony and the web of being. And some of the disciples start to get it. Some just really have a hard time because it's so different from the way of the world and from the religion of the world, which has been sucked often into the story of the world. And my friends, guess what? That is exactly what happens today. We have turned religion into a way to make ourselves good and to a way to choose the right faith so that we can go to heaven. We come together and we think it's just as simple as loving and believing in Jesus. And if everybody prays in school and if we have the 10 Commandments in every courtyard, or I don't know, it's not the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus was primarily connecting with God and letting that beautiful forgiveness and mercy that we marinate in completely change and infect us in the best way possible, and let that spread out and out, practicing that with other people together. And then we all start to slowly shift, and we all do the work together, and we all change, and that just keeps going out and out and out. What's interesting is that the disciples struggled with this, and we know that they did, because when Jesus is coming to Jerusalem that last time on Palm Sunday, they were really excited, thinking this is it. This is the time in which Jesus is going to claim He's the Messiah. get the Romans out, do all of the topsy-turvy stuff that we want in this world, and then all of a sudden Jesus will be king, and we're going to be his right and left-hand man, and we're going to be in power, and it's going to be great. And we know that they were thinking this way. We know that they were confused when that didn't happen, when Jesus instead washed their feet and shared bread and wine with even those he knew that would betray, deny, and run away from him. It was a completely different way to be. So for now, if you call yourself a Christian, it has nothing to do with how often you do or don't go to church, or if you believe this or that about Jesus and how often you say the creed or what you have memorized or what parts of the Bible you do and don't know. It's not really that important. Being a Christian is a way of living in this world that begins here and here. It is finding time every single day to connect with the sacred the best you can, to find a calm within yourself, to make yourself a temple where you meet God inside. And then you let God's mercy and forgiveness and grace and compassion wrap you up and dwell in you so thickly and strongly that it changes you from the inside out. It changes the way you react, just like Jesus reacted so maturely and wisely to everything that happened. And slowly we start to change a person, a community, a group at a time, allowing them to do it in their own way and at their own time, with so much love and grace and freedom in the process. I believe that's the way of Jesus. And you might ask about the cross, which I mentioned last week. The cross was the ultimate revelation of everything Jesus had been doing. Because imagine if everything that Jesus had been teaching and preaching and all the healing he's doing, and when it came time for him to be arrested, if he was like, yeah, you just try to get me, you idiots, you suck, and ran away, or, as they're taking him to Pontius Pilate and everything, and he's like, I hate you guys are the worst, I'm gonna get you. It would kind of derail everything he's been saying. It would reveal a petty God, a cowardly God, and instead we don't get that. To the very end, in the heat of the worst moment, Jesus shows us the absolute final fruits of what this way of being can look like, which is no fear, no defensiveness, no hatred in the face of the worst of the worst. And then when people see him after this and he comes back, there's nothing but grace and love and forgiveness. And it's almost as if God is saying, yeah, you really thought you'd win, huh? You thought the story of the world was the real story and that you got Jesus? Nah. My friends, let me tell you a secret. All the shame and guilt and dark energy and negative low frequency crap that's going on in the world is not sustainable, and it is going to crush itself. And eventually, in the long run of things, anything we consider evil and dark and violent and chaotic is going to collapse and capitulate to the good. And what's going to be left when we're exhausted from yelling and screaming and tantruming? Love. Love. So when we've crucified everyone we can crucify, when we're tired and exhausted of all our own junk, what's left is resurrection. What's left is love and hope and new life. And that is the story that Jesus is trying to teach us, that God is trying to teach us in the resurrection. It's an exclamation mark on everything Jesus did up until then. A highlighter, not in place of ministry, but the final underlining everything Jesus said times a million. Well, I hope this was helpful for you. I encourage you to like, to comment, to share if there's someone you know who maybe could benefit from this message. And I will see you next time.